welcome. Thank you for joining GE Healthcare Financial Services team here for a conversation with Jeff Ronner and Chad Calendine to discuss how radiology can leverage finance to bridge the gap with hospital administrators. I'll be moderating. I'm Mark Lombardi with GE Healthcare Financial Services. I've been with GE for 20 years. I lead our East Zone team and the managing director for that team out in Nashville, Tennessee. Very excited today to have both Jeff Ronner and Chad Calendine. In fact, just to give a little insight, when we talked about putting this webcast on, we actually targeted both these individuals. So thankfully, we were able to get them. Tremendous wealth of knowledge and a couple different perspectives that I think will be valuable in interacting with hospital administrators through their lens. So very, very exciting. First, I'll just intro both of the panel members here. Jeff Ronner. Jeff's the CFO at Shields Healthcare Group. He manages financial strategy, reimbursement, and administration for the company, as well as more than 20 joint venture partnerships. He oversees finance, reimbursement, payer contracting, and purchasing functions. He joined Shields in 2003, about the same time I moved to the Boston area. And Jeff and I have worked together for about that amount of time. And he has negotiated very hard every time we've had an opportunity to do some work at Shields. So excited to have Jeff on. He's got a Bachelor of Science degree from Albright College and an MBA from Suffolk University. Also excited to have Chad. I moved down to Nashville in 2009, and getting the chance to meet Chad eventually was an honor here. Chad completed both his fellowship and radiology residency at Emory Hospital in Atlanta, where he served as chief resident. He now serves as president of Premier Radiology, an imaging center company which owns and operates 35 outpatient imaging centers in 4 states. He's CEO of Advanced Diagnostic Imaging, professional group of over 45 radiologists covering 6 hospitals and over 100 teleradiology sites. He's also CEO of Advance Health, the largest independent multi-specialty physician group in Tennessee. And in late 2019, Premier Radiology and Advanced Diagnostic Imaging joined Rad Partners, the nation's largest radiology group, where he also serves as executive vice president of partnerships. Chad does so much, as you can tell, so very thankful to get his time here. But the reason why we looked at both these individuals is because they have really interesting perspectives. We actually had a best practice sharing session between both parties here in Nashville pre-COVID about a year or two ago. Had great discussions, and we thought, so much good content came out of that. We need to share it. So we're going to do that today, and we're going to start off by talking about, sadly, what's happened in the financial impact of COVID. So I'll start there. A lot of talk about alternative sites of medicine in partnership with hospitals. And I wanted to understand, maybe we'll start with you, Chad. How has that impacted, your long-term and short-term strategy? Has it been an accelerator because alternative sites have now become in vogue, especially during the height of COVID, where hospital missions were concerning and people were thinking that they had to go elsewhere for care? Or is it actually slowed down a little bit because of the capital crunch that occurred from COVID? So maybe you can start us off, and then Jeff, love to hear your perspective, especially as it relates to the ASC sites and what you saw there. So Chad, can we start with you?
Yeah, so we have had, there have, of course, been short-term and some long-term fallout or side effects of COVID as it specifically relates to outpatient imaging. We saw a very short-term drop in volume in March and April during the shutdowns, and we right-sized our facilities and staffing around that, but never completely shut down, given that these are really needed services that are really important to the continuum of care of patients. That quickly resolved. Those short periods of decreased volume resolved relatively quickly. In May, June, and July, we saw volumes ramping back up significantly. In July, we were basically back up to baseline, and since then, we have been exceeding baseline on a weekly and monthly basis. And some of the volume we were catching back up from times when we were down or had limited services, but a lot of it is just continued growth. We set volume records now every week and every month, year over year. And when we look at our year over year volume, even given the drops in March and April, we're actually up. year over year. So I think it highlights a couple of important points. One, outpatient imaging is really, really important to the continuum of care of patients, and it's not a service that is elective or ancillary and can be avoided in most circumstances. And so we have stood ready to make sure that we meet those demands. It has had some obvious changes to our operations. We do social distancing, masking, how we get patients through the centers, how they're screened at the front, specific protocols around patients that are COVID positive. So it's had an impact on operations, but our volume and the demand for the services is actually up. And I think that probably relates to the second part, Mark, that you were talking about. It does highlight the fact that we've seen this movement to outpatient imaging for years, and it highlights another factor that people have felt more safe in the outpatient environment than going to a hospital campus. So that is highlighting the fact that there's a need for these services. There's support from the patients and referring docs for these services, and we have to find ways to continue to grow. To that end, we're actually opening our next imaging center in our Florida market on Monday. So clearly, we're continuing to grow the number of centers to meet those needs. So I think short-term, very short-term, negative impact. Long-term, probably a more positive impact on the future of outpatient imaging.
And those partnerships, Chad, that you were working on with hospitals, it sounds like they're only expanding then. Is that, and you're seeing that those discussions still ramp at a high rate right now?
Oh yeah, we're expanding in every market. I mean, we have joint ventures in 4 states. We're expanding in all markets. There is an issue, and you touched on it briefly. Hospitals have suffered pretty bad losses related to COVID itself. That, of course, is going to change their capital environment. So we're going to have to be a little more flexible about how we are able to access and provide capital in partnership with our health systems, knowing that they have a larger perspective. They have other issues outside of just the outpatient imaging focus. We've been able to work through those and are continuing on a path of growth in every market.
That's great. No, it's what you would think in this environment. Jeff, tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world. And let's spend a minute or two on the ASC side, because I know, obviously, that was a tough market when obviously the height of COVID. So how have you worked through that? And then talk a little bit about the partnerships there and what you're seeing working with hospitals in that area, and also your overall imaging capabilities as well.
Yeah, I think everything was pretty similar to what I heard Chad describe, but I'll start with the ASC first. And in the state of Massachusetts, they basically shut down all non-essential services. So we only were doing essential surgeries during the April-May timeframe. And I think it was around mid-June when we actually started back up again. So that was, as you said, a pretty dark time and a pretty tough time. And similar to what Chad described, there's a pretty significant pent-up demand. So when we did actually get back up and running, the month of July and August and September were very strong, just because people had put things off that they should have done, probably earlier during the pandemic period, though. But I guess the one thing that we do see, though, as we look forward, is nobody's playing sports. Kids aren't playing sports, colleges aren't playing sports, and that is a pretty significant chunk of the surgery business and the imaging business, and we're definitely seeing the impact of that. That's just not happening right now, and obviously we all don't know when that's going to happen. But as far as the imaging side, we're in the PET CT business, and so that's cancer related, and as you can imagine, that only had a minor impact because cancer went on, and people weren't going to put off cancer care during the COVID period, so that only had a modest interruption. Our MRI business did what Chad said is we had a pretty big V, is what we call it, and we're a little bit different in there. Or at least I think we're different, is we're about 70% outpatient, about 30% actually located within hospitals, and we saw the hospitals come back very slowly, and for obvious reasons, same things, all the reasons that Chad described. either the patients didn't want to be in the hospitals, or quite frankly, the hospitals didn't want anybody that didn't have to be in a hospital in a hospital. And our outpatient sites certainly saw the benefit of that and the pent-up demand. So certainly in the third quarter, our third quarter business bounced back. It isn't significantly above last year, but it is above. We're seeing more patients than we did see last year this time. But I think the one thing we did notice, we look at the mix, we're definitely seeing the Medicare patients who are probably a sicker population. Those patients are the ones that actually came back faster and are needing more care than, say, the commercial patients, because they can put it off, or they maybe they're the ones that were playing sports. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's not surprising. I think both these themes are not going away anytime soon, and that leads me to my next question around, interacting with hospital administrators to say, okay, we're seeing the shift, at least in this time, and maybe it's going to be a shift. People like going to these alternative sites of care and stay there. The more demand is going to go there. So talk to me, and maybe we'll start with you, Jeff, this time, is, given the fact that you're interacting with hospital administrators so often, I mean, many of your partnerships, if not all, are with hospitals. How do you interact? How do you prepare for those discussions? Talk to us a little about some of the themes you're hearing from those discussions. I think what's important for this audience watching is, how do you take the knowledge you have and discuss it in a way that makes the financing piece of it, the finance discussion, a little less scary to talk about, right? I mean, finance can be a topic that's a little bit concerning for people to surround themselves around. But how are your interactions with hospital administrators around this area? How do you talk about long-term benefits, all those sort of things, and how do you prepare for those conversations so this audience can do that with their hospital administrators that they work with on a regular basis?
Well, in New England, imaging has been outpatient for a long time, so that's a pretty mature business. And the ASC is as we were behind the rest of the country, so that's only, especially in Massachusetts, so it's only in the last 3 or 4 years that there's actually been a move towards outpatient. So it's pretty simple with the imaging. That's everybody is kind of known what was needed to be done, and hospitals actually find it pretty lucrative. So we're trying to keep as much imaging in the hospitals as possible, but knowing that if they wanted to expand and if they wanted to have a low-cost alternative, imaging in an outpatient environment made sense. From the ASC point of view, again, like I said, it's new in the state, and the hospitals that we've signed on with pretty much are looking for a lower-cost alternative, more efficient alternative. Their physicians were actually asking for it because they're looking for more revenue and a more efficient place to operate. And of course, especially as Chad mentioned, pre-COVID, there was definitely a trend towards outpatient. Patients wanted to go to outpatient. It was more efficient. It was closer to their house, and it was much more better experience. And of course, during the COVID and post-COVID, that's just that trend has just accelerated.
So, Chad, same question to you. It's great. It's what I would, and I think that's important to hear, that maybe the conversations are a little easier because everyone's on the same page going, we all want to go this way, especially when the physicians are driving it. It makes sense. So they're open to listen. You're in there having a conversation about how you can partner and see some benefits. Chad, how do you prepare for those conversations? I mean, I know you work with a number of large hospital organizations. I think of one in particular. But talk to me a little bit about, in each market, I believe it's a little bit different with those organizations. Talk to me a little bit about how you prepare for discussions, what you talk about. I think you do some really innovative things on the imaging side, on the efficiency, as does Shields. But I think of the way you help patients when they're in there to get their annual screenings for mammography, et cetera. But just talk to me a little bit about how you prepare for these conversations with hospital administration to say, this is the reason why it makes sense to go down this road with us, or stay the way you're doing, stay the course of what you're doing. Can you just take a minute or two and just enlighten us there?
Yeah, I think, like Jeff was saying, a lot of those discussions are relatively mature, and the hospital administrators are aware of the benefits. They want to have a growing outpatient footprint. They know about taking care of their own patients, growing their market share, providing additional points of entry into their health system. A lot of those benefits, are there. We do talk about them, but it's a receptive audience, and many times we're preaching to the choir as it relates to the need for growing these outpatient services. We obviously never take it for granted. We want to do a good job taking care of the patients, focus on quality patient experience and compassion, and we don't take any of that for granted, and our hospital partners expect it out of us. When it comes to discussing capital, it is true that you have to be really sensitive to your partners' perspectives and their current circumstance. We have we have several joint ventures. No two of them are identical. So you have to understand the differences, and some of them on the financial and financing side are very important, and they're set up that way for various reasons. We have some joint ventures where we're the majority, some where we're the minority, some, more importantly, as it relates to the financing and capital aspects, some that are consolidated and some that are not. And particularly that's important when it comes to capital. Capital is precious, to the health systems, of course. They want to deploy it wisely, but they also have a lot of demands on the capital when they're looking at the health system as a whole. If we have a joint venture that's not consolidated and basically self-financing, which describes the majority of the joint ventures, then they can grow without having capital, and it's not a consolidated entity. They can grow without having the demands on their capital budget, which is huge. And in those markets, it can mean a lot quicker growth. There are some financial reasons that they choose to be consolidated and some issues around control. And so in those, we're standing in line with the other capital needs of the health system, and we have to be sensitive to that. We obviously spend time talking about why we think it is good for the patients and why it's good business. And track record of success, helps make those decisions, together with the health system.
I think it's important. I think that capital component is something that I'm sure everyone in this audience has heard. I have heard it. Right now, shrinking capital budgets to make sure that the health systems are as healthy as possible coming out of COVID is a focus. Knowing that in some respects you need some capital, right? I like what you said around they're not consolidated under the hospital's overall financials so that they're a separate entity and they can grow separately. Talk to me a little bit about knowing that you're going to probably need some capital from the hospital. How do you have those discussions? How do you interact with the administrators to say, hey, this is the benefit of even in a tough capital environment, dedicating XYZ capital to this is going to lead. Are you putting together pro forma? What information are you sharing with hospital administrators to show the benefit of the use of that capital is going to have?
Yeah, so we put together, probably like most, you have the story as a whole. Here's why we think it's important. Here's what we do. Here's what we've done in the past. And here's why we think this is a wise investment. And as joint ventures, we're investing our dollars. We're on board and investing our dollars right alongside. So we believe in it. We're together and we're aligned. So that's the first part. But absolutely, there has to be a lot of financial due diligence. It's the CFOs working together, and that's going to fall into their health system and capital budgets, as a whole. So you have to have people that are relatively sophisticated on the finance side, preparing those and working hand in hand with the CFOs and the accounting and finance side on the health system side. Very important part of the relationship. Yeah.
Is there one metric or one number that pops out to you that comes up in every conversation with administrators in the hospital world? And then Jeff, the same question to you, or just one thing that you need to always make sure you're focused on before you sit down with hospital administration around asking for capital?
Well, there's probably a couple. They always want to know the total capital ask because they're putting that in the context of their total allocated capital. So you have to have a reasonable expectation. You can't expect to get 40% of the capital budget for the whole health system, so you have to have some perspective around, the total capital. But the return on investment is always important. When it comes to outpatient imaging, though, that's an easy discussion. There are not a lot of things that the hospital invests in that will return 20 to 30%, year over year. So it's certainly not acute care hospitals. So they understand that this is from a purely return. This is a pretty easy investment to make. So you obviously want to show the returns based on history, and then the total capital ask.
Yeah, I think those are two key points. I'm glad you touched on them. And Jeff, same question to you, and maybe even as it's in the ASC space, because I mean, Shields, had been an MR and imaging provider for many, many years. But tell us a little bit about the mindset of how the ASC space worked out, and maybe some of the things there that hospitals focused on when they were partnering with you around the returns that they were expecting, and what you could offer in that area.
Yeah, well, ASC has been a completely different model for us than the imaging, because as Chad said, there's returns on there, and generally there's somewhat immediate or short-term returns, where the ASC is a much more longer process just to get up and running. It's a much more capital-intensive investment. So it's getting hospitals just comfortable with the time frame that it's not going to be like imaging. It's going to be a waiting period. But as long as you have a long-term perspective and access to sources of borrowing, I think that's one of the things that we've been able to bring to our partners is access to capital that they wouldn't have access to, or would, as Chad says, would affect their financials. So we're doing it outside in a joint venture. It doesn't affect their capital structure. I think the main thing here, and we've had to get used to it too, is just a longer process and very capital intensive. But once you get it going, it's going to have great returns as well. But it's clearly not the immediate bang like you would see in imaging.
No, I think the process is a key point, right? It's going to be longer in this environment to get the capital that you need to ramp up. So the ROI story's got to be there. You've got to have a good discussion about how it impacts, obviously, patient satisfaction and patient treatment, but also expect it to be a little bit longer, even if the returns are really good. I think that's a great point. I'm interested too, because now you have both sides of it. You both work on both sides, right? You go there, you work with hospital administration, and then you come back and have to communicate to your teams, some or many of which are physicians, depending on who we're talking about here, what you're entering into, what agreements you're entering into, and what return for their time and their hard work, they should expect. So talk to me a little bit about, how you come back and, specifically talk through these agreements you're entering into with the physicians that you both interact with on a daily basis. And maybe, Chad, we can start with you and obviously focus on your largest relationship that you have out there, or maybe another area. But I think when you're interacting back and forth, leading all these different groups, how do you tell them about the financial impact it's going to have and what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, first, particularly as it relates to my, my partnered radiologists, I work with a great bunch of radiologists that have invested over the past 10 or 15 years, tens of millions of dollars in outpatient imaging, and we've been rewarded for it. But it's a testament to their willingness to invest in their own practice and their own future that they've done it. As it relates to how we talk about it and what we relay to them, it's full light of day. They have access to any and all discussions, financial projections, agreements. We go over them with all of our partners, and now a growing set of partners now that we've joined Radiology Partners. And again, it's a bunch of very interested, aligned radiologists that want to invest. We want to invest in our future and what we do, and it's been a very positive relationship. We felt really for many years now that the best outpatient imaging, the best opportunities, and really done the best is going to be in alignment with the health system. And we found really great health system partners. Ascension, of course, is our largest health system partner. They've just been wonderful to work with. They're one of the largest not-for-profit health systems in the country, focused not just on the financial bottom line, but focused on doing what's right for the patients, for the markets, for the physicians, and really supporting the communities. And so it's been a wonderful partnership, and we're continuing to grow.
And when you come back and say, hey, we're entering into this, and obviously the impact financially is going to be X or Y or Z, the additional work that has to go in and these different areas. What are they? I mean, boil it down. When you're making a decision, obviously it's a two-way street, right? I mean, Ascension, and you have to work together to get to a point where it's beneficial on both sides. What are the biggest things that you focus on and communicate back to the physicians you work with? Is it, what's going to happen in regard to overall income for the practice, or what metrics do you look at that are most? Is it back to ROI, right? You're investing your capital too. How do you look at it to go back to your team and say this makes sense, and maybe these 2 or 3 other partnership opportunities are not worth the time?
Well, we're always driving to win-wins in the relationships. And so I think as a practical matter, if we couldn't get to what we considered a win-win, the conversations really wouldn't be coming to a group vote, because, we never really got there. We never really established terms that were going to be beneficial for both parties. But to the extent that they do, we share, those full financial projections, and frankly, dealing with a large radiology group, what I think might be most important may not be what my partner thinks is most important. So we want to make sure we address everybody's concerns and issues. There's obviously there's sort of a financial hurdle for things. There's financial acceptability of risk and the like, but then it becomes very practical about how it impacts our day, how the studies are covered, what our reach and scope has to be, what impacts it has on our lifestyle. So all those things are important, and we talk about all of them.
Yeah, Jeff, same question to you. And I know you're going back, and obviously you work with numerous parties. And how does it, how do you make sure it makes sense on both sides? And what are the big metrics? Is it, an ROI metric? What are the big metrics that, drive the decision-making process, both on your side and with your partner?
I think one of the beauties of our business, or our what we've been able to develop, is we're a very dense footprint. So I don't think we have 40 locations out there. I don't think there's one of them that's more than 100 miles from where I live. So there's not much goes on, and this is a pretty tight community. So I think everybody kind of talks, and everybody knows what everybody else is doing. There's a strong hospital association that works well together. That I'm sure that we're on the radar of them from time to time. But and I think we have great partner relationships, and we're not embarrassed to have any one of our partners or prospective partner talk to another partner about how's the relationship with Shields going. And the businesses that we've developed initially was MRI, later it was PET-CT, now AAC. We did some radiation therapy, and they've all developed off starting an initial partnership, and because we earn their business to expand the partnership in different areas. So that's pretty much the way it works for us, and we've moved into other areas, and that's when it gets a little dicey, because I always say when you cross a state border, it's like being in Europe, going from France to Germany. It's a completely different set of rules, different set of payers. Patients are motivated differently. Physicians are maybe employed, may not be employed. So whenever you cross a state line, you got to kind of make sure you understand where you're going and what the ground rules are in the new state you're entering.
No, that's a good point. So let's shift a little bit and talk about how you look at capital and purchases on behalf of your own organizations. Take a minute, and maybe we'll start with Jeff. How do you look at purchases, both replacement and de novo kind of opportunities within your organization? How are each of those purchases analyzed, considered, looked at? I think this helps not only in your organizations, but it helps understand, going back to Chad's point, knowing capital is so precious. I'm sure the way you're looking at it is very similar to the way hospital administrators are looking at it. Talk to me a little bit about how you consider different projects, and spend a minute talking about the difference between replacement and a new opportunity where you have to go out there and purchase capital for the first time.
So the de novos is pretty simple. I think we've done 2 or 3 de novos in the last several years. So this is a pretty mature market in New England. and there's not a lot of de novo opportunities or left, as well as a regulated market for the most part. So they're really making sure that the utilization and capacity is controlled pretty tightly. So there's not a lot of expansion going on. But I think the good news is that people like GE have had such quality equipment that lasted far longer than we probably all expected. So we've got units out there that are greater than 10 years old in quite a few of our locations, and it is a challenge to determine what's going to drive to make the change or upgrade the unit. But I think that the number one for us right now is just because of the pressures primarily from the government payers is we know rates have come down dramatically over the last 10 years, and they're probably going to continue to come down over the next 10 years. So we need to drive efficiency. I think that's number one, is everything we can do to make a more efficient process out there with the patient is job number one. And then, of course, just now with what we're going through and like that, patient safety and being able to perform different kinds of scans that we didn't perform in the past are ways we're looking to, one, expand the business, but provide a better service for not only our patients, but be a better complement to our partners.
No, that's great. And Chad, same question to you. I love the model that you guys have too. And how do you consider capital purchases? Both, obviously you're growing, right? So on the front end, how do you look at those? And I think, how do you look at the replacement? I think Jeff brings up a great point. If you're getting the same dollars for a scan on a 11-year, 10-year, 9-year, pick a year-old unit or a brand new unit, it's tough unless, to your point, it drives either efficiency or a significant change in the way you care for patients. I think those are key points. But talk a little bit about how you look at it. Is it similar, maybe slightly different in some ways? I think it's important for people to understand when they're approaching, either administration or just an investment opportunity, how they approach that with what information that makes a difference to people on the financial side of things.
Yeah, I would agree with Jeff. I mean, it's really why, in part, why the health systems are partnering with us. They expect us to run very efficiently and to have very efficient use of capital, something that the health systems struggle with in these particular arenas. And so we try to be very efficient with our operations, including efficient use of capital and maintenance and service agreements. So we try to really make careful use of our money there. We are expanding. We've expanded for years, so we buy a fair amount of equipment every year. For the most part, we build full-service imaging centers, and for the most part, we have found a very effective pricing strategy with GE for new equipment, with the exception of MR. We typically buy refurbished units in part for what Jeff is talking about. It is, of course, our largest capital expenditure. We have to be very careful with it. And unless there's some compelling maintenance cost issue or sequence imaging capability issue, we have to be very efficient with how we buy our MRIs. So we are tasked with efficient use of capital, and in partnership largely with GE, we've been able to get to new equipment that it performs well and is less expensive to maintain than the other vendors for us. So.
No, it's great, and I think that's important, right? It's efficiency, it's intelligent use of capital. If there are different ways to get to the end goal, and that might mean a new unit here, a refurbished unit there, and that mix, having that in your mindset before you go to financial leadership to say, we've thought through this. It makes sense to buy this way and that way. That's important, and I think it's you guys do an exceptional job about it. Let's talk a little bit about this environment and growth. Kind of going back to where we started a little bit. The dynamics everyone faces right now, the current market, it sounds like things are coming back. Has that opened up discussions? Are you guys back to pre-COVID type of interactions with administrators? Are you taking more conservative financial projections? Is it tougher to get consensus? I know this is 3 or 4 questions in one, But I'm just assuming that today people are looking slightly differently at care than they did, a couple months ago. It's amazing what a difference a year can make. And then on top of that, we've got an election that's changing things. Talk a little bit about all the different components of today's market, today's current environment that have changed the way things are, or maybe even accelerated. Maybe it's been a positive change. I'm interested to know, and I'm sure the audience as well. Maybe we'll start with you, Chad, and then head over to you, Jeff, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think, and we've touched on it a bit, I think the outlook for outpatient imaging is very positive and remains positive. We're not changing our projections or really our trajectory. We have more patients and more patient demand than we can get to, and so we're just trying to keep up with patient demand. I think the health systems see it as a huge opportunity to grow market share, to bring new patients into their health systems, and we have seen their interest continue. The issues that are created for us are really issues that lie outside of the outpatient imaging space itself, but lie with the larger health concerns of the health system. I mean, these health systems have been financially impacted in a large way by COVID, and outpatient imaging and probably a few other service lines have had a relatively unaffected projection, but most of what they do has seen substantial impact. So that impacts their capital and their ability to grow when you're in a consolidated joint venture structure. So we're working through that with our health system partners. They want to continue to grow. They want us to continue to expand with them. We want to continue to grow and expand and meet those needs, but we're sensitive to their current capital environment. And we will walk alongside our health system partners, and where we can lean in more and where we can do more, we will, because we're all on the same page. It's the right thing to do. It's going to be good for all of us long term, but we are having to be sensitive to those capital issues that lie with the system as a whole.
That's a great point. It's never been a better time to make sure you really are both understanding of the current state, especially for the health systems, and do your homework and make sure that the story you bring up there is really good in order for them to, for anyone at this point to see that precious capital leave the doors. Jeff, same experience, a little bit different. Just, what have been the changes coming into COVID that you're seeing, and how are you preparing to come out of it?
I'll go a little bit different direction than Chad, only because I want to repeat some of the things he said. But the patients are different now. I think we think price transparency, something we've all been pushing for years, especially in the outpatient environment. We really think it's time for price and transparency. So we're going to really put a lot of effort into make sure that we can be as open to patients and get them as much information as possible, so they know how to make that decision. I think patients and physicians, more of them are at home than they ever were before. More referrals are coming through telehealth. So there's a sea change out there. We've got to be able to adapt to what the patients and physicians are doing and what they would expect. Obviously, everybody is safety and quality and quick. They want to get in and get out fast. They don't want to sit in a lobby for a long time. They don't want to be in a machine for a long time. So all those kind of things are how can we be more conducive to what the patients actually want, what the referring physicians want. And of course, referring physicians, for the most part, a lot of them, when they furloughed their staff during the COVID, they didn't bring back as strong a staff as they had before. And so I think we're seeing that the referring community is strapped out there, and they need more efficient processes, or they need us to be to adapt to their needs more. So I think that's the side we're really focusing on, is how can we focus on the change in the needs in the outside environment, outside of our locations.
I love the price transparency. We've seen some people lead. I think of a couple of health systems in Florida where I've seen their websites that show a lot of information about it, and we've seen an opportunity to lead by others. It's a great point. And just for the audience too, we have a Q&A period that's going to open up here. This is the last question I have, so we plan on opening up and having at least 15 minutes for discussion. So now's a great time to get those questions into the chat as we get the final question that I have on my list here for both Chad and Jeff. So please, use that chat box and enter in a couple questions, and we'll get to those in just a minute. So final question for me, and then you're off the hook, at least from my side, and we'll go through what the audience has. And I think this is important. You know, what advice would you give to physicians, and I would say even specifically radiologists, as they interact with senior executive leaders, CFO, COO, CEO within the hospital landscape? What advice would you tell them? You know, please keep this in mind when you're up there having the discussion. I think we had a couple of great topics already pop up around capital and, you know, what the systems are going through right now. But is there specific advice? Is there general advice? And we'll start with you, Chad, being a physician. I guess it's probably the easiest place to start. And just tell us what would you tell somebody who's getting ready to have a big financial discussion with some hospital health leaders in the next couple days, weeks, months?
Yeah, I think probably the single piece of advice that would be most helpful, and it's more general, and you have to just apply it, you know, where you are. What we have found to make a real difference and to be successful in our joint venture partnerships is we try to spend the bulk of our time thinking about the circumstance and the situation from our partner's point of view. Not, why is this great for me? Look at what we can do here. But if we say, if I was the health system CFO, what are my concerns? What are the issues? What are the positives and the negatives? How can those be addressed? What's going on with the health system as a whole? How do we show our value outside of just imaging? Because that's what they want to hear. We have the benefit of focus. They have the burden of this broad perspective. So spend all your time thinking about what's best for your partner, how to make them successful, how to make their market share increase and grow. And if you spend all your time thinking about your partner, you will come to a win-win. And more important than that, you'll establish relationships that will benefit you for years and years to come.
I love that. I love that one part. First off, benefit and burden. I'm going to use that. I'm going to officially license it. So apologies if I stole that from you right now. But I think that's a great comment there. And I think preparing and knowing what they're going through, right? Both the news headlines and also their financial statements. And if people on the financial statements are far simpler than I think some people tend to make them out to be. I don't want to say that too loud because then I might be working myself out of a job. But I think, you know, and if you have questions about those, you know, I would encourage you to call your GE Healthcare team member and say, help me understand the financials of my organization. We analyze them continually to make sure that we are prepared to have those conversations with hospital leaders to say, we know where you sit right now. Where can we go together forward to make it the best scenario for you? So I love those comments. Jeff, similar, a different, same. I don't want to steal the thunder there. I think Chad came out with some great ones. So I'm not sure what you have to add, if anything, but what's your thought there? What advice do you give to physicians and specifically radiologists? And what advice maybe do you give to your physicians and radiologists, given you are the CFO of a large organization on a daily basis?
Well, I must say, Mark, that I think the transition, the radiologists that we partner with a number of radiology groups. We have our own group we employ internally, and the way they have adapted over the last 10 to 15 years to the change that's taken place in the marketplace is just remarkable. I mean, I remember when I started out in this business anyhow, it was all about the technology, and they've really adapted to now is recognizing it's not only just technology, but it's also efficiency, it's customer service. So I would say that radiologists have really jumped on board, and for the most part, they really get it. I mean, I guess there's one other thing that we would like is just what Chad said, is to continue looking for more opportunities and more different applications for MRI. We've been doing it with PET-CT pretty effectively because that's still a new technology that's people are learning all the time about different ways to use the PET-CT. But to continue to look for different ways to utilize the technology, because it's an unbelievable technology. And I think that's we're every couple of years a new thing comes along and everybody kind of says, oh, I didn't think of that. So, but I think by and large, in our market, the radiologists have just been fantastic.
I think it's a great point. I think so much new technology, right? And I think about even my own personal life. There's so much new technology I could buy each and every day, but do I need it? Does it make me more efficient? Is there some kind of return on that? And I love how you tie that back. Put yourself in the health system shoes, put yourself in the administrator's shoes, whether you're in a health system, outside of health. Does this make sense to invest in? Almost like you do personally. Does it make sense to buy a new TV just because it came out with the new latest and greatest, or does it make sense to wait for something that is more beneficial from an efficiency perspective? I want to thank you both for your time. I think we got to a number of great topics I think are helpful. I hope the audience enjoyed it. We're right at 45 minutes here, so it's great timing to save about 15 minutes for questions. So we'll swap over to the live Q&A period. But thank you again for taking the time. Thanks for everybody for joining, and we hope to have more of these discussions in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Well, it's great. No, this is a great time there. Just waiting for questions to load up. And I think I got a couple here, so just trying to read them quickly here. So Chad, the first one's to you. And Jeff, I'd love to get your input as well on this. A couple questions around the differences, the financial differences in states that you look at. How is it different when you're looking at a site in Florida versus Wisconsin? How is it different, Jeff, for you, maybe in Massachusetts and New Hampshire? I know you talked about that in the past. What are the financial considerations you take into place when you're looking at a site in the same state or out of state? So, Chad, let's start with you, and then let's kick over to Jeff, if that's okay.
Yeah, for us, every state is substantially really in two ways. One, the competitive landscape can be very different, in part related to CON issues. And secondly, the payer landscape and really the payer level is very different state to state. Say in Florida, not only is there a lot of competition because there's really no meaningful CON, the payer rates are somewhat depressed in Florida, which means you have to be very careful with your operations in capital. In Tennessee and in South Carolina, where there are CONs and a little less competition, it's kind of middle of the road as it relates to the payer rates. And still want to run very efficient operations, but a little less constraint around low cost competition and what is oftentimes, I think, low quality competition. In Wisconsin, little different circumstance there where there's competition, not a CON state, there is competition, but the rates are actually higher in Wisconsin. So a little better landscape as far as what you can do with operations and capital. I know being part of Rad Partners, we see some of the additional issues that they have, say, in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area and the LA area, where again, you're talking about dense competition and lower payer rates. You have to be very careful with your money as it relates to operations and capital.
That's great. Jeff, any thoughts from you on
that? Pretty much the same thing as Chad said. I mean, the payer thing is obviously very significant. Every state's the payers group is significantly different, as well as Medicaid is significantly different in every state. So that's what would be number one. I would say that the regulatory environment in states we go into are significantly different. I think we're well versed because Massachusetts is one of the worst. So I think whenever we go someplace else, it actually doesn't look quite as challenging as where we live. So that's a little helpful. I think another thing that is probably employed physicians, depending on where you are, whether the physician may be employed by the hospital. So from a referral point of view, so that's a different challenge as competitively and so on and so forth in areas where they aren't employed so much by hospitals. So those are, I would say, the three main factors I see as we cross the state lines.
No, I think it makes sense. I think understanding how both your facilities and your partners' facilities are reimbursed and what the payer mixes in those areas are very, very important to make sure you craft a good financial plan. Jeff, I got a question here. It came from a comment you made around access to capital, seeing that as maybe a differentiator that you could offer some value to your partners with, and the same to you, Chad, when you mentioned a couple of different topics around this area. Talk to me a little bit about how you look at access to capital, how you make sure you have access to capital so you have a competitive advantage as a partner when you're working with a health system that may be more hamstrung because of their capital budgets.
Yeah, well, clearly the health systems, especially now, are a very difficult time accessing capital. So our model is even more significant. And I think the biggest thing we have going for us is we've been at this for 30 years. We got a track record. When I call you up, Mark, and say we got this great idea in some place you never heard of, you say, well, wait a second, you guys have done this a few times before, so I'm betting you guys wouldn't be doing this again if you didn't know what you were doing. So I think it's very helpful. And as same thing as we talk to other financial institutions that we've used along the way, we've demonstrated. Not to say we haven't tripped a few times, but I think everybody understands that we've got a pretty high bar as far as getting into businesses or making investments, and generally we're a pretty safe bet.
No, that's great. How about you, Chad? Any thoughts? You guys do a great job too of negotiating, having capital ready. But how is that? How do you look at that to make sure you have a sustainable competitive advantage when you're working with a partner?
Yeah, I think similarly to what Jeff said, the joint ventures themselves and a long track record of success provide a lot of credit-worthy capital facility. And in our joint ventures that are not consolidated, we're not counting against the capital budget of the individual division or hospital or health system. So really giving them access to additional capital outside their typical capital budgeting process is important to our continued growth.
That's great. So these are real time live coming in here. How would you rank the importance of new revenue, i.e., new service lines, capabilities, and capex replacement at this point, given COVID capex constraints? It's a great question, right? New revenue versus replacement. Where would you rank? You know, when you're looking at importance of it, uh, I would assume that in most cases, new revenue is going to win the day. But talk a little bit about that, how you weigh new revenue versus replacement. Maybe talk a little bit about service costs and how you're looking at that, and also productivity, right? What replacement story do you get excited about? I will start with you, Jeff, because I think you're going through a cycle right now where you're actually upgrading a lot of older units. I happen to have some inside info there. But take a minute. What really compels you to go, let's prioritize this in front of a new project because we've already got existing volumes. We are the safe bet they made. We did great there in this area, but we've got to upgrade equipment. Take a minute and talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think fortunately, I'm with a very entrepreneurial group for starters. So they look at someone's problem as being an opportunity for us, and how can we take advantage of that? So I think that's probably number one. Number two is this is a speed bump we're hitting here in this COVID period. We don't feel like this is something that's going to be around forever. So we've got to manage the business, through this period. And if we need to make investments on equipment that needs to be replaced, or whatever, well, so be it. We've got to do it. And fortunately enough, knock on wood, our margins and our volumes have been strong enough that we can continue to march in that path. I think, as mentioned earlier, the biggest impact we saw was back in early on in the springtime, is when we saw the biggest impact of this COVID interruption. And now we're staring down a period that looks kind of uncertain in front of us, but I don't think anybody believes that we're going to do the draconian measures that we did back in the spring. So it'll be an impact, but it won't be as significant. So we feel pretty confident that we can, one, get through the bad the turbulence or the bad weather that's out there for the short term, and long term we're very bullish on this is the right business to be in, and we need to do everything we need to do to make sure that our equipment is the best out there, and if it needs to be replaced, then we make that investment to do it. So unfortunately, we got people like yourselves who recognize the same thing, that this is a long-term business that we're in, and we need to look at the opportunity over the next 5 years, not over the next 2 months. So.
That's great. I think I always think of it as, does it make me money? Does it save me money? Does it change the game critically when I'm looking at a replacement? That's something I've always talked about and heard. I think you guys have been really good about pushing that too. We want to make sure our equipment is really, really good, can actually serve our patients the best. But what are other benefits that come with that? Let's hear the story for both myself and the client, right? And the customer walking in. If the clinical differences aren't great, maybe the priorities there become a little different as opposed to throughput technology that really changes the game for you. So that's a good question. It's an interesting one. One for you, Chad, a little bit different, just because actually we've got time for maybe two more. And the question is really around acquisitions in the physician space, the consolidation, physician practice space. Is this sustainable? What are the benefits? How does it impact access to capital markets? There's fewer now. Does that mean you guys get more time with bankers and get a more opportunity to go out there and have conversations where you can add value? But take a minute and just talk a little bit about that question that came in from the crowd.
Well, I assume they're talking about the physician consolidation specifically within the radiology space. I
I
assume.
think that would be
So radiology, yeah, radiology is still exceptionally fragmented. Rad Partners, we are the largest radiology group in the country, but still only represent 3 to 4% of the radiologists. I think there has certainly been tangible benefits of scale, infrastructure, access to capital for us, and we anticipate that to continue. And I think we'll see it not only increasing in radiology, but in other physician segments. I know it's certainly happening in our local markets now, and I think it will continue.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. 3 to 4%. That's and the largest group. So I don't think I had that information before this. That's helpful. And then along the same lines, what do you think the number of JV opportunities will be in 2021? Do you think there'll be more because the limitations on capital and potentially more bullish entrepreneurial market once we get post COVID, or do you think it'd be about the same as previous years? So we'll start with Chad, and then maybe Jeff, you could give us that perspective too on your side. But Chad, any initial thoughts there along those same lines?
Yeah, our experience has been those opportunities continue to increase. We have all of our centers are joint ventured with a health system, and the health systems have reaped the benefit of increased volumes, increased market share, increased pull from other physician service and service lines. So we have numerous meetings about extending the joint venture partnerships across the country, and our view has been it has continued to increase and it has not slowed down related to COVID.
Jeff, seeing the same, seeing a continued increase, or are you seeing a slowdown? Or
Yeah, I guess I would see almost the opposite. I think that in our market, everybody is so focused on the COVID, unless the conversation started pre-COVID. I don't see many new conversations starting right now. But there's a number of conversations that started pre-COVID, so I think it's a lot quieter in our area than what Chad described.
I think that could be geography. Going back to the first question that was asked, when you look at Boston and Massachusetts, maybe some of the restrictions there, Jeff, as opposed to Florida and some of the other areas that you're in, Chad, it could be maybe some of that. I'm guessing there, but I think that might be something to do with it. Last question. And I love this question. Probably the favorite one that's asked, and I'll end it with you, Chad. We've got 2 minutes and 43 seconds or so. How can a radiology administrator best work with finance to prepare a case and influence capital buys for their department? Coming from one radiologist to potentially another asking the question, can you take a minute and just talk about that as we close the session out?
Yeah, I mean, like any business or business opportunity, you have to prove out your value proposition and an efficient use of capital and return on the capital. The fact is, though, that outpatient imaging well done has a return margin of 20 to 30%, which is far, far in excess of an acute care hospital or where else they're going to be able to spend their money, probably something more in line with like a surgery center or ASC. So you absolutely have to prepare a compelling financial argument. There are a lot of comings and goings in that around movement of volume, change in payer structure, change in location, share, the performance that we prepare prior to really opening any center or doing a new joint venture relatively extensive, but the business case is compelling, and the history of success related to those really, accelerates the continued growth in that same vein.
Yeah, I think projections, right? Making sure whatever you're putting together in that business plan, they're realistic, they're based on something. What are your projections on? I think when we just look at business plans as a company that assumes and reviews risk on a daily basis, we're looking where are the numbers coming from. You guys have always done an amazing job of bringing real numbers based on real patients, and it makes that an easy conversation. And the returns do speak for themselves, but you have to have the right numbers as the inputs. So, hey, thanks again to both of you for your time. I know this was an impactful session for me and hopefully for others. I would love to talk about other things that came in around capital allocation, around technology and telehealth and customer service, and some other questions that popped in, but we'll save that for another session. But thank you very, very much for spending the time here. And thanks for the crowd for listening. Please provide us some feedback so we can do this better going forward. And we want to have more of these sessions that talk about the financial aspects of our business, how we can make sure that we're preparing for what hopefully will be a robust post-COVID era in healthcare come this great vaccine news that's hitting. So thanks again for the time. We're signing off here and appreciate everything.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Chad.